Well, as you heard, the topic dominating the agenda this week was the Trudeau government's first budget. It spells out a $29.4 billion deficit this coming year, and deficits continuing for at least the next 5 years. But on the other side of the ledger, there are record commitments to invest in infrastructure, the environment, Canada's Indigenous people, and the middle class. To look at it all, I'm joined by three MPs from the different parties. Francis Scarpaleggia is a Liberal MP for Lac-Saint-Louis and the Liberal Caucus Chair. Todd Doherty is a Conservative MP for the BC riding of Caribou Prince George. And Guy Caron is the NDP's finance critic, and he's a member for the Quebec riding of Rimouski, Nejet, Témiscouata. All three of you, thanks for taking the time. Obviously, let's talk about the budget. Francis Scarpaleggia, I gave two of the basic tenets of the budget, a lot of spending, but we're not sure when we're going to get out of deficit. What do you think Canadians and your constituents should retain the most out of this budget?
Well, I think that what they should retain is that the budget is a reflection of the Liberal platform that Canadians voted for on October 19th. And they should also retain that it's a budget that is both looking towards the future and also trying to help the economy in the present. So it's sort of a dual kind of approach.
Okay, Todd Doherty, what do you take back to Prince George, to BC, when you talk to your constituents about this budget?
Well, I think my honourable colleague just mentioned that it's a reflection of the campaign that this government went on to get elected on October 19th. I would absolutely categorically call that false. They campaigned on a promise that they had a plan, that they were going to spend up to $10 billion run a small minor deficit. And what we saw on Tuesday was that they don't have a plan. They're throwing more money at it. They're getting Canada and Canadians further and further into debt, $113 billion at the end of their term. They made a lot of promises with no real action, and truthfully, no job or no plan to get us to a balanced budget, and no jobs plan.
Okay, Guy Caron, your reaction in a nutshell. I mean, what do you make of it when you go back to Quebec? A lot of spending that some of it the NDP agrees with.
Yeah, there is some increased spending in some areas that we also propose some increased spending on, which obviously is good. It's really a contrast with the budgets of the previous years, and nobody will deny that. On the other side, when you compare this budget with what was in the Liberal platform, it's actually falling short of those commitments. There's another broken promise, and I think that's the most obvious one. Every single party, the NDP was the first to propose it, Conservatives followed suit and implemented the beginning of the decrease in income taxes for small and medium-sized businesses. Okay. Every single party promised to decrease it to 9%. Liberals did as well, but they are freezing it at 10.5%, and they are reneging on that promise. So this is one broken promise. And what I see also on the infrastructure front is that it's a bit of a shell game. Not only they spend less than what they committed to, and that was supposed to be the central piece of their stimulating the economy framework. We see that they are spending less, and some of it is actually didn't used to be part of the infrastructure spending, such as social housing. It was put in the heading of infrastructure, so it looks actually better than it is in reality.
Okay, Francis Scarpaleggia, I'm going to put 2 points to you. One of them is Guy Caron's point. The other is a point that's come up all week. The first big point is the question, and that is, why did your government not spell out what date you think the Canadian economy will, or your government will bring the Canadian economy out of a deficit? So why did you not give it a target date? A lot of people say that's very important. And the other is the minor point he brings up, but it's a very specific one, and that is you did promise, as the other two parties did, to cut the income tax, the tax on small businesses. Right. This is not something you can defer. You either do it or don't do it. You didn't do it this year. So on the small point and on the largest point.
Okay. Well, on the largest point, could you repeat the first point? I'm sorry.
Okay, well, basically the first point is the big one, and that is, why did you not set a date for getting out of deficit?
Okay, well, this is a very, the economy is in a very fluid situation. It's obviously very dependent on the price of oil. As a matter of fact, the drop in the price of oil shaved about $15 billion off of revenues, and that's why you have a bigger deficit than what we anticipated in the platform. But I think we all know that projecting 2, 3, 4 years out is a bit difficult in these circumstances. And right now the priority is on creating economic growth, and that is what this budget is aiming to do. And that is what small businesses need. They need clients. They need they need demand, and they need a growing economy. So we're trying to help small business by pursuing a growth agenda.
Okay, but what about when people say during the election, you didn't hesitate to say we would run deficits of a limit of $10 billion, and it's over that. You also said we will get us out of deficit by the end of our term. But you're now not repeating any such specific commitment. You're saying you can't make that commitment.
Well, I think, again, we're in a very kind of fluid economic situation. Obviously, the objective is to get to balance the budget in the not too distant future. But we have a very difficult economic situation, and the focus right now, the economy has changed quite a bit in the past few months with the price of oil and so on. And the priority has to be on pursuing growth. And it's very important to note that we are predicting over the medium term a drop in the deficit as a percentage of GDP and the debt as a percentage of GDP, so we'll be on the right track.
Okay, Todd Darty, I have to ask you, I've never seen, in covering budgets for 20 years, I've never seen more large groups coming out with statements of support for a budget than this one. I mean, the municipalities, the engineers, the chartered accountants, the environmental groups, indigenous groups. I mean, group after group were saying that this was overdue spending. These are spending in crucial areas, infrastructure, which has been neglected, environmental. Anyway, go down the list.
Well, again,
what do you say to Canadians where there seems to be a large contingent of Canadians who are appreciating this spending?
Well, I think, again, what we need to look at is the facts. And the reality is that there is no plan to get us out of deficit, get us back square. There's no jobs plan. The infrastructure spending is really, as my honourable colleague from the NDP said, that it really is a shell game. They're asking Canadians to, it really is back-ended as well too, or back-end loaded, that at the end of their term, this is what they're going to get to, but we're asking Canadians to hang in there and trust us. And some of the difficulties in answering your questions that my honourable colleague are having and those across the floor is the facts. And really, when we're pressing them for questions, leading a country is a tough job, and sometimes you have to make tough decisions. You have to be able to look out for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We have 1.3 million Canadians that are out of work right now. 7.3% is what our unemployment rate is, highest in 3 years, their own parliamentary budget officer reported the January numbers that indeed that the Conservatives left $4.3 billion surplus. So hanging their hat on the issues of the past, true leadership is focusing on the future, but also giving Canadians hope, so that they don't have to depend on unemployment insurance, that they have jobs to go to, that the government is making the right decisions that create the sound environment so that we can have investment in our country, so that we can create jobs, so that the small businesses are healthy, the backbone of our communities, and the investment in infrastructure, whether it's social or green, and we're not against that. But the traditionally infrastructure are roads and sewers in our communities, and we're not seeing that. And we're seeing a lot of concern and some questions, and this government doesn't have the answers. Okay,
we're going to have to wrap up on Guy Caron. Quick question. You are going to your convention in Edmonton in 2 weeks' time. Yep. This is the last time we'll have to chat before that. You have a budget like this, which is pledged a lot of spending. You pledged not to run a deficit in the election campaign. Where does this fit into, I don't know, leadership of Tom Mulcair? What do you take this in as a finance critic? What do you take into the convention? Is this going to bolster Mr. Mulcair's argument that you did the right thing in the last election by promising no deficit, or not?
Well, I think we'll have a great convention in Edmonton. I heard that we actually have over 1,500 delegates registered so far, so we can expect even more on the day of the beginning of the convention. People realize that the situation that we're in right now is very different than what we were in 6 months ago. And you ask why so many groups were actually supporting or coming in favor of this budget. That's because, as I said at the beginning, it's very contrasting to the previous budgets, where we were talking a lot more about cutbacks and cuts in services. So people are obviously happy with this. Now, this being said, a budget is more of a statement of principles. We'll see how this will be implemented, and that will play a large part in
right, but your leader now is going into this saying that, yes, he sees that there's probably in this time and age, there is now probably an argument for running a deficit when he was adamantly against it during the election campaign. I'm just wondering about that.
Well, what we're saying is that the important thing, and that's something we'll have to watch for, is not to fall into a cycle of structural deficits, which is amounts basically at the end of borrowing to actually pay down the programs, which is actually very detrimental because that's a cycle that's very hard to break out of. Now, investing, when you can ensure that there is a rate of return, such as infrastructure when it's well spent, such as programs in EI and the GIS, for example, Guaranteed Income Supplement, where you know the money will be spent because those people have no means of saving them. These measures actually benefit the communities and their economy as well. So if it's well spent, it will bring about growth, and that will be a good thing. If it's not well spent, then it might actually be problematic. So I think people can actually distinguish the difference between both, and we're very happy that many of our suggestions and our proposals during the campaign have been included in the budget as well.
On that note, we're going to have to wrap up. I know all three of you are heading back to your ridings. I want to thank all three of you for your time. I know, Francis Scarpaleggia, you will be watching with interest the polling, which is inevitably done after the release of a budget. All three of you, thanks a lot. Have a good 2 weeks in your riding.
Thank you, Peter. Happy Easter.
Bye now.